Hi, so in this video I want to cover how we can use WSL as a way of testing Linux applications, and in particular the Linux tools that we develop here at Octopus in a Windows environment. I mean, a lot of people have actually switched to Linux as their primary operating system just for day-to-day use. But if you're still using Windows, then WSL is actually a really good option for running Linux applications. And the reason why is because it's actually real Linux at this point. There has been an evolution of WSL through versions 1 and 2, but what we have today is actually basically a real Linux operating system running side by side in Windows. So it has very good compatibility. Performance is pretty good. And apart from a few missing features, which we'll dive into, you can expect to run almost any Linux application in WSL without any issues. So the first thing to note is that WSL did come in 2 versions. So there was version 1, which was a kind of an interpreter. It really emulated Linux, and it was an impressive bit of engineering, but there are just, I think, few too many incompatibilities and issues that simply couldn't be resolved with that style of running Linux. And so what Microsoft did is release version 2, and version 2 is it runs Linux behind the scenes in virtual machines, and so that it gives it a very high degree of compatibility with the as you run Linux inside it. The fact that it's running in a virtual machine is mostly transparent to you, though. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to set up any images or configure memory or anything like that. It is very abstracted away from you, and you don't really have to worry about it. So what you can see here is I've got a bunch of WSL instances, and they're all running version 2. If you ran WSL in the past, you may find you have a number of instances that are set at version 1. And you really need to, or it's definitely recommended that you upgrade to version 2. So what you can do is just set the default version that WSL will use. And in this case, I've just set it to version 2 here. And that will mean any new instances that you create will be spun up in this new version. One of the things that I do like about WSL is that you can copy and paste the instances. And so what this means is you can set up, say this Ubuntu instance here. What I would normally do is set this up as kind of a template. I install my general, my common applications and get everything up and running with all the updates. But for day-to-day use, or if I'm actually testing an application, what I actually do is create a copy of this and then work in the copy. And in that way, I can do the changes that I need to do, kind of muck around and install things. And once I'm done, I just delete the copy, and I can then next time just make another copy of this base one, and I know that I've got a clean environment to work from. One of the easiest ways to do that is through this tool here. Just zoom in a bit. So this is a kind of a third-party tool that adds a lot of management capabilities to WSL. And that is exposed as this command here, Lxrun offline. Oops. So that's this tool here, and as you can see, it has quite a lot of options here for manipulating WSL2 instances, and far more actually than the WSL command line tool that is provided by Microsoft. And so what I would do here is run a command like this. And so what this will do is actually create a copy of my existing WSL2 instance into an instance called mydev. This would be the directory where the file system is kept. And then at that point, I would now have a WSL instance called mydev, which I can work in do whatever testing I want, and then later delete and clean up. And I don't kind of leave all that testing in my base instance there. So that's really handy. It's kind of a I guess the equivalent in a virtual machine would be like creating a snapshot and then just reverting back to the snapshot. WSL doesn't really have the concept of snapshots as such, but but copying the WSL instances out is a nice way to achieve that same kind of outcome. The other thing that's very useful with WSL2 is that it integrates well with Docker. So if you open up Docker, and I'm in the configuration settings here, you go to resources and WSL2 integrations, you get the option to just enable Docker in one of your WSL2 instances. And this is really nice. Like, this is just a single checkbox. You enable it and apply it, and then at that point you can come in and you have full access to Docker. So actually, if I go maybe image, so you can see here I'm looking at a bunch of images from within Docker itself, and if I did the same thing here, I get the same images from Windows. So I get the same kind of view of Docker from Windows or from Linux, and that's very handy. Actually, it means you can run Docker within a Linux container or within a Linux WSL2 instance very trivially. So one downside of WSL2 is that it doesn't come with systemd. So systemd is like the service manager, I guess. It's when you install applications and they run as a service, that's typically managed by systemd these days. For whatever reason, the WSL just never supported that really. There are some third-party hacks out there. I think they're in various states of development. Your luck may vary if you want to try and use one, but actually you don't. For most tasks, you don't really need systemd anyway. So an example would be our own Tentacle. When you install Tentacle, it attempts to create a systemd service, and then it'll try and run it, and I think it'll fail. I think you'll see an error message as you install the Tentacle in WSL, but you can just run the Tentacle manually. So if I go to the opt directory, go into Tentacle. So I've installed the Tentacle in this WSL2 instance previously. What I can do here is just run the Tentacle manually, and that's going to go out and connect to my Octopus instance. So this is just a kind of the most easy workaround to the fact that WSL2 doesn't support systemd. And if you then want to get back into this instance while this application is running in the foreground, you just open up another terminal, and then you can run them. You can essentially run an application in the foreground here, and then continue to work here, debugging whatever files that you need, for example. One of the things you quite often want to do is run an application in WSL2 and have it reach back out to the Windows host. So in this example, I have an Octopus server here running on localhost. So this is the Windows localhost. And what I may want to do, for example, is run Octopus on Windows in my host here, because I've got all my databases set up, but then have a Tentacle from WSL2 reach out and connect to it, and then I can debug it there. What you'll find is that the localhost here in Windows is not the same as localhost here. So if I go, so I'm just going to try and contact localhost and see what I can get. There's nothing there because I'm not actually running anything within WSL2. This localhost is different to this one, and inside or in the context of this WSL2 instance, there's just no web server running here. So the way you can find the IP address of the Windows host to connect out to is through the let's see, resolve conf file. This file sets up DNS configuration, and the way WSL2 works is that it resolves DNS queries through the main Windows host. And so this is just a convenient way of getting the Windows host IP address, because this, even though what we're actually setting up in this file is DNS, this IP address here is actually what the Windows host is. And so we can test that if we go curl right. And so now I've just received the HTML of the Octopus login. And so that's how I can get traffic between WSL2 and then back out to the Windows host. One thing to note though is that the traffic is actually bound by firewalls. So this particular rule here from my Windows firewall settings is the one that allows HTTP traffic on port 80. So this rule is currently enabled, meaning traffic can get through. If I go ahead and disable that traffic, what we'll see is I'm now no longer get connection from WSL2 back out to Windows. So that's important if you find that your connection between WSL2 and Windows is blocked for some reason. The first thing you would do is just go through and probably disable all the firewalls, check again. And if it starts working, then you know that there was either a rule that was blocking that connection or there was a lack of a rule that enabled the connection. And then you can start adjusting those rules accordingly to get the connection that you need. Another interesting thing about WSL is that it will automatically map the traffic on any ports open within WSL. So what I mean by that is if I start a web server within WSL2, and in this case, I'm just using Python to run a simple HTTP server on port 8000 here. I can go here and actually say localhost 8000. So technically localhost here and localhost here are still different. It's just that WSL is smart enough to know that I've opened this port here within the WSL2 instance, and it will route traffic for me, so I don't really have to think about it too much. Having said that, the reverse is not true. So if I start a web server in Windows, so I'll use Python again and just start that same web server on port 8001, I don't get the option of just using localhost in WSL2. So if I go localhost here, 8001, there's nothing there. And again, it's just that traffic is routed from Windows into WSL, but it's not routed out in the same way. So to actually get that to work again, I'd have to know that that IP address of Windows host, and then I can get that that network connection back out again. In summary, I think if you do need to support Linux applications and you're running Windows, WSL really should be your first port of call. It's quick and it's convenient, using tools like that Lxrun offline to create copies and clean up copies of WSL2 instances. Makes it very easy to create test environments that don't kind of leave a polluted state on your system. You do quite often need to know how to get that Windows IP address. So again, that's just the resolve.conf file. I'll just zoom in here so you can see that. And that IP address there is the IP address of the Windows host. If you're finding network connection issues here, just make sure that you first disable the firewall. That's probably going to give you access between WSL2 and Windows. But once you've confirmed that, you can start adding the particular rules to the firewall that will grant you access there. And the other thing to really be aware of then is that the WSL2 doesn't have systemd, so you may see errors about running or starting services. But the workaround there is to just run, typically to run the application you're trying to run in a foreground mode, and that will give you access. So that's it. That's all I wanted to show. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thanks a lot. See ya.